Kita dibangun oleh US Embassy. Kita bekerja di bawah US Embassy. Kita di sini tuh ada banyak banget. Kita ada bi-monthly team. Pertama-tama bi-monthly team tuh apa? Jadi pas kalian pertama kali masuk ke depan, you can see ada gambar-gambar slides yang di atas itu bi-monthly team kita. It has a lot of information about America dan itu selalu ganti setiap 2 bulan sekali. Kayak bulan ini kita ada tentang health, American technology, California, Hollywood. Jadi kalian nanti kalau misalnya udah selesai acara ini kalian bisa lihat-lihat juga. At America itu juga kita sering banget adain acara-acara. Acara kita itu udah banyak banget dan sangat-sangat bervariasi. Acara yang mendatang itu contohnya Hollywood's Experience in Indonesia. Kita bakal kedatangan aktor dari film Java Hit. Ada yang udah pernah denger nggak Java Hit? Pernah. Nah nanti aktor-aktornya itu bakal datang. Salah satunya Aryo Bayu, Makilan Lutz. Ada yang suka nonton Twilight? Nah, artis dari Kellan Lutz itu salah satu artis dari Twilight, dia bakal datang ke sini. Nanti boleh datang aja 18 April hari Kamis. Nanti ada aturan untuk registrationnya. Nanti tinggal dibaca aja di website kita ya. Selanjutnya kita ada konser juga, konser music jazz, Youngest Quartet Sings Bebop. Jadi bagi di sini yang suka musik boleh tinggal datang, it's free. Tanggal 4 Mei hari Sabtu jam 7 sampai 9 malam. Jadi malam mingguan di sini dengerin lagu jazz, bawa temennya, bawa pacarnya, gebetannya, siapapun boleh, gratis. Selanjutnya kita ada performance juga, bagi yang suka lagu-lagu Walt Disney, kita mau adain tribute for Walt Disney. Ini isinya itu dari Julia's Piano Playground, they will play Walt Disney music. Jadi untuk tribute bagi yang suka piano, bagi yang suka musik boleh tinggal datang aja ke sini, ajak adik-adiknya, kakak-kakak, saudaranya atau semuanya diajak biar rame di sini ya. Itu Sunday 19th of May, 3 p.m. until 5 p.m. It's free, so you guys can just come here and check it out. At America itu juga udah berdiri dari tahun 2010 dan kita udah adain banyak banget acara-acara. For instance, kita pernah ada demo masak dari Chef Windex, if you guys know Chef Windex. Kita juga pernah kedatangan Maya Sutoro, pernah kedatangan Glenn Fredly, Agnes Monica. Dan kemarin-kemarin ini hari Jumat Sabtu kita ada kedatangan dari PMI ya, donor darah, dan banyak banget performance dari Piwi Gaskens, ada Piu Padi kalau ada yang kenal, mereka juga kemarin datang perform ke sini. So you guys would never know what kind of events that we will have. Jadi datang aja, sering-sering datang ke sini. So how would you guys know and keep on updated on our events? Itu gimana sih caranya? Gampang banget, tinggal login aja ke website kita www.atamerica.org.id. Kalian kalau punya Facebook boleh register pakai Facebook atau mau pakai email juga boleh. Tinggal masukin email kalian, nama kalian, terus udah deh kalian udah jadi member kita. Nanti setiap Kamis kita bakal email terus newsletter tentang event-event yang akan mendatang. Dan itu semuanya free ya. Kita juga ada Twitter, for you guys who like to play with Twitter. Jadi tiap kali kalian nge-tweet atau nge-mention at America, your tweets will appear there. Itu kayak live people who tweets itu mereka bakal muncul di situ. Jadi bagi yang mau eksis gitu, misalkan lagi di Amerika kalian mention aja, lagi di Amerika nih ada acara education and law gitu, nanti di mention aja. Kita juga punya Facebook, so every events we will have pictures. Dan nanti kalian bakal banyak di foto-foto. Foto-foto kalian itu bakal bisa kalian lihat di Facebook kita. Jadi kalian bisa langsung login ke Facebook, cari Air America, nanti kalian tag sendiri foto-foto kalian ya. Okay, without any further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Frank Whitaker.
I don't need this. Selamat siang. I think it is. My name is Frank Whitaker. I'm from the U.S. Embassy. I am the Cultural Affairs Officer, but I don't do a lot of culture. I do a lot of education. And we are very pleased to have representatives from the United States here today featuring several law schools. Now, you're all asking yourself, why am I here? Right? Why are you here? Do you know? Indonesia wants to be a global player in the world, right? You are the future of Indonesia, and if you are going to take Indonesia to the globe, to be a representative on world organizations, you will need the skills to do that. You will need the skills to compete in a global world. And how do you obtain those skills? Well, I've got a panel of experts today here to talk with you about an LLM degree. Talk with you what you need in order to compete in the world today. So I want to welcome folks to come up. First, Dan Bernstein. Dan is the president of Law School Administration Council. Why don't I have you sit in that second chair over there? Next, Joseph Schneider. Joseph Schneider is the director of international education at State University, New York, Buffalo. So it's northern part of New York State. Jeffrey Thomas, who is here from the University of Missouri in Kansas City. Julie Foster. Julie Foster is Director of International and Pipeline Programs at Valparaiso University. And finally, we have two alumni here who are going to talk about their experiences studying in the U.S. And the first one is Surya Natadmaja, right? Surya studied at UC Berkeley. I'm sorry. He studied at American University. Wrong coast. Excuse me. American is in the East Coast. UC Berkeley is West Coast. And finally, Stephen Waroko. And he went to Berkeley, correct? He is the UC Berkeley alumni. I also want to recognize two others in the group who you can meet later. One is Kari Hornsby, right? He is from the University of Minnesota, and you'll have a chance to talk with him later afterwards. And finally, Michael Gran, who is here from St. John's University in New York. I'm going to give this one to you. We're going to sit down here, but I'm first going to ask Dan Bernstein to talk a little bit about the value of an LLM. Have you heard of an LLM before? Do you know what an LLM degree is? Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to start at the very beginning then, and Dan is going to talk to you a little bit about an LLM and what the value is for you.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. I'm pleased to be here. I don't represent any particular law school, but at the same time, I probably represent all law schools. My organization, the Law School Admission Council, is a membership organization of the 200 accredited law schools in the United States and the 16 accredited law schools in Canada. We actually facilitate students who are applying to law school, first for the JD program, which is in some respects the undergraduate degree in law in the US, and then secondly for the LLM. Most of you, I think, are LLB students here in Indonesia. So you are getting your first degree in law. The LLM is actually the second degree in law in the United States, and the representatives here actually are representing programs in the U.S. For students who wish to pursue the LLM degree, and you'll get a wealth of information from these individuals. The LLM degree is one that's become increasingly popular for international students. We have a very large number of students actually from Asia, an increasing number of students in Indonesia. It's a degree that has a lot of versatility for foreign students. After 1 year of study and completion of the LLM, the student is actually able to take the bar exam in a number of states in the United States. Many students pursue the LLM degree as a way of enhancing their opportunities with their current employer, or actually opening options for future employment. Many people who are interested in teaching in law, especially in their home countries, get a degree from an American law school. The role of the Law School Admission Council is really to facilitate your applying to law school. So the one thing you should remember is our website, lsac.org. It's the place that you can go to find out about over 125 different LLM programs in the United States. It's also the place where if you're interested in applying to a law school, you can apply to us. We facilitate the application, the letters of recommendation. We also verify transcripts for the students, and then we submit all of that information on behalf of applicants to the schools that they wish to apply to. So the Law School Admission Council really provides a valuable service. It's optional at some law schools, but at an increasing number of law schools, you're actually required to apply to the LLM program through the Law School Admission Council. As I said before, it's a very valuable website, lsac.org. And you'll find a lot of information that will be helpful to you as you pursue the LLM degree. Again, I just wanted to take this opportunity to welcome all of you here, and again, you'll have a number of representatives from great law schools to talk to about the various programs. The one thing you should remember is that programs vary greatly among the various law schools. So you should go from table to table, because what you hear at one table may be different from what you hear at another table. And there are a variety of programs, and there's probably more than one program that might be right for you, and you should look at the various opportunities that are available to you. So again, thank you all for coming, and I also want to thank the representatives who took the time to travel a long way to talk about their individual programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. We're going to ask Joseph Schneider to come up and talk with you a little bit about legal education in the United States and law school.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Joe Schneider. I work at SUNY Buffalo Law School in Buffalo, New York. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the law and legal system of the United States. I was very excited to be asked to do this, and my enthusiasm was only tempered slightly by finding out that I had only 20 minutes to tell you about the entire legal system of the United States. It is a subject on which we could spend a lot more time, so I'm going to give you sort of a very sort of condensed version that'll just give you sort of a basic sense of the US legal system. Yes, it works. So first we're going to talk a little bit the structure of the US government. We'll then talk about our sources of law, and finally we'll end with legal research in a common law system. And I may add a little bit at the end about sort of legal education in the United States to segue into the next speaker. The United States Constitution set up a federal government with 3 branches: an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. The legislative branch is our Congress. It is a bicameral legislature, 2 houses, a House of Representatives, and a Senate. The House of Representatives is elected according to population, right? So each state in the United States is apportioned representatives according to its population. In the Senate, each state gets 2 senators. the federal legislature has the power to enact laws, but only in certain situations. And I'll talk more about this later, about the relationship between state government, state law, and federal government. But it's important to note at the beginning that the government that the Constitution established, right, when the Constitution is ratified, does not make any mention of establishing state governments, right? And the reason that it doesn't make any mention of establishing state governments is because they already existed. So at the time that the United States is kind of brought into being, there are already sovereign states in existence. So the Constitution makes no mention of creating states and empowering states because they were already there. So this is an important notion later that we'll talk a little bit more about. So I said that the House of Representatives, is kind of the people's house. It's apportioned, representatives are apportioned by population. Our population is taken once every 10 years by what we call the census, right? So we count how many people are in the United States, and then we apportion or reapportion representatives in the House. California has 53 representatives. Poor Montana has only 1, right? So you can see that there are very significant disparities in representation in the House of Representatives. The executive branch, executive power is vested in a president, right? I don't know how many of you saw, he's outside, standing by the Google Earth exhibit. Did you see President Obama? If you haven't seen on your way to visit the tables, be sure to stop by and see President Obama. The president has the power to appoint ambassadors, judges, public ministers, consuls, secretaries, who head departments and all other offices of the United States, and this is the important part, with the advice and consent of the Senate. One of the things that we'll see in the establishment of the federal government is that power is apportioned to do certain things to each branch, but other branches are given the ability to check the power of the others, right? And so we refer to this sometimes as a separation of powers, but more accurately as a system of checks and balances. So in this case, the president appoints a federal judge, nominates a federal judge, right? But that judge is not confirmed without the advice and consent of the Senate. So the Senate has the ability to stop a presidential appointment. The president, however, has a very important power of his own. He has the power to veto legislation. So when Congress enacts a law, it goes up to the president for signature. The president must sign off on law, right? On enacted law. The president has the power to say, no, I'm not signing that, right? So the president has the ability to check the power of the legislature. The legislature can override that veto, but the threshold for overriding that veto is higher than the threshold for simply passing legislation. The judicial branch is vested in one Supreme Court of the United States and such other federal courts as Congress establishes. Congress did establish a federal court system, and those federal courts have limited jurisdiction. So federal courts can't hear any cases that they want to. They can only hear certain kinds of cases. Cases arising under citizens between two separate states, and cases arising under questions of federal law or constitutional law. We call that diversity jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction. And all of this is going to be very important when we get to the part about finding law, legal research. So just bear with me until we get to that, and this will make more sense. Federal judges, as I said before, are nominated by the president and confirmed with the advice and consent in the Senate. And they have the best job ever because they can never be fired, with limited exception, and they can't have their pay diminished. That's great. I mean, come on, getting a job and not being able to be fired, that's pretty cool, right? So they can be impeached, right? So you have to do something really, really bad to be impeached. But otherwise, you have your job for life. It's a lifetime appointment. And you should note that federal judges in the United States are not, we don't vote for them, right? They're appointed. The federal court system in the United States has 3 tiers. United States District Court is our federal court of first instance. The United States Court of Appeals is our intermediate appellate court. And as we said before, the United States Supreme Court is the court of last resort. Our federal courts are broken into judicial districts, right? So trial cases are heard at the district level. Those districts together make up what we call circuits. So when a case within a certain circuit is appealed from a district court decision, it goes to a particular circuit. So a case in district court in California will go to the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. A case in New York will go to the 2nd Circuit Court of Appeals. This will be important later when we talk about adjudication in a common law system and precedent. So when we talk about the ability of the federal legislature to only pass legislature according to certain enumerated powers in the Constitution, and when we talk about federal courts having the ability to only hear certain kinds of cases, you should think about federal powers as sort of displacing certain state powers. But states retain a tremendous amount of lawmaking power. States have kind of a residual power. So as I said before, you know, the United States is broken into 50 states, and each state has its own government, its own legislature, its own body of law, both enacted law and case law. So it's really not accurate to talk about one law and legal system of the United States. It would actually be more accurate to talk about the 51 law and legal systems of the United States. So there's a tremendous amount of variety between the laws of the United States. I mean, it's not truly variety, right? There's an awful lot of similarity, but each state has its own body of law. And the structure of state court government mirrors the structure of the federal government. One important difference would be that the executive in state court government is referred to as the governor, whereas in the federal, the president of the United States is referred to as a president. But all states except one have bicameral legislatures, and all have court systems that are very similar to the federal court system. And to give you just a sense very quickly of the court structure, where I'm from in New York, there are various levels of trial courts. Our intermediate appellate court is called the Appellate Division, and the court of last resort in New York is called the New York Court of Appeals. And those courts in New York are similarly broken into jurisdictions. So we have judicial districts that make up appellate divisions. Now, as a lawyer, as a law student, and then as a lawyer in the United States, it is important to know where we get our law, right? When you're presented with a problem by a client, you know, the first question you ask is, well, what is the relevant law? What law applies here? And for a United States lawyer, the answer to that question could be enacted law, right? Enacted law like a constitution, a statute, a regulation, a treaty. But it can also mean, in a common law system, case law, judge-made law. So in the United States, we have a common law system where decisions by judges are binding on future cases. Okay? So when a judge issues an opinion, that opinion is binding on subsequent cases in that area of law. So you can very quickly see how that could become complicated, because there are some areas of law that all you have for the source of law is judge-made law, right? Case law. But there are other areas of law where there are statutes at stake, but there's judge-made law that interprets those statutes. So then you have a mixture of both enacted law and case law that interprets that enacted law. So there's a tremendous body of law that lawyers in the United States need to understand how to research. Now, when an appellate court in the United States issues an opinion, appeals in the United States go before a panel of judges, and arguments are heard. There are no facts presented at the appellate level in the United States, right? So appeals are simply, they take the facts in the record as they exist at trial, and they're arguing about the law. And a panel of judges will hear an appeal, and then they vote. And the majority wins. The senior judge in the majority will write the opinion, and that opinion is called the majority opinion, and that is binding precedent, right? So that is what counts for future litigants. But not all of opinions do not have to be unanimous in the United States, so you can also get a judge who says, I don't agree with the majority. I don't agree with the result. I don't agree with the legal reasoning, so I'm going to write my own opinion about how I think the case should have been interpreted, should have come out. And that opinion would be called the dissent. The dissent is not binding law. So when you are doing research in a common law system, you're asking really 3 questions. What kind of law governs my situation? Am I dealing with a constitutional question? Am I dealing, are there cases that are important for my case, precedents that I need to cite that are binding on my case? Are there statutes that are relevant, right? So what kind of law? But you're not just asking what kind of law, you're also asking when are the statutes that I'm looking at? Am I dealing, in other words, with current law? Because in a common law system, if you have a case that is changed, the legal holding of that case is changed by a subsequent case, right? You have to make sure that the law that you are citing is the most current law, right? Because again, there's an evolving body of common law over time. And finally, where am I getting my precedent from? All right, and when we talked before about the jurisdictional nature of decisions, we'll get there, there we are. If a federal case goes up for appeal in the Ninth Circuit in California, and they interpret, say, a federal statute, and that same federal statute goes up in the Second Circuit in New York, and the Second Circuit issues an opinion, those opinions do not necessarily have to be consistent, right? So there is some variety between geographical jurisdictions in the United States. You would not tell an appellate court in California, in the Ninth Circuit, that it must follow a decision of the Second Circuit in New York. You can tell it that it should, that opinion is persuasive, but you can't tell it that it must. It is not binding authority, right? So where cases are decided is just as important as when they were decided. So the last thing I would say, just to, the kinds of, what I think that an education in the US can give you is a very sophisticated understanding of doing US legal research and taking all of those different sources of law and kind of marshaling them into an effective legal argument. United States legal writing, I teach the course in my law school to all non-US lawyers. So if any of you ever applied to my law school and we admitted you and you came, I would actually be your very first teacher. We teach you how to make a legal argument in the United States. It's one of the very first things that we talk about. And so when I encounter lawyers from other countries, one of the very first things that they tell us is that American legal argument is very, very structured, right? Much more structured than they've ever experienced in their home country. And that American legal research is very difficult to do, right? And it's very particular, right? You have to be very careful with where you're getting your precedent from, when it was decided, right? You have to be very thorough. So those kinds of skills can be very valuable to take back home. And I think that should be it, because I want to leave a couple of, are we doing questions now or just sort of at the end? If you want to ask questions now, then let's just do that. How many of you are in law school right now? There are no law students in the audience today. Who are you and what have you done with the law students? Are there any? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Jeffrey Thomas, and he is going to talk to you about applying to law school in the United States.
I feel like I'm on a game show here, that I should call you down and we should have some kind of contest or something. So it's really it's exciting for me to be here. I love Indonesia. This is my third or fourth time in Indonesia, so it's very good to be back. I want to take just a moment before I start on my PowerPoint slides to give you my perspective on why you should consider coming to America to study for an LLM. There are 3 reasons I think you should consider. Reason number 1, you can improve your English ability. Now, of course, being in America, you can improve your spoken and oral English, your understanding, but in particular, you will improve your legal English. And legal English is very important if you are going to work with international lawyers, because many of them, maybe even most of them, can do work in English. So you would need to work in English. Second reason to come to America to study for an LLM is to learn about American law. And the reason for that is because American law is very important in many international contexts, that American companies are doing business in many places. I was talking to a lawyer yesterday, and we were talking about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It's an act that applies to American companies and other companies that have connections to the United States that prohibits the use of bribery in order to get contracts. And it's a very complicated and interesting piece of legislation, but the point is that American companies or companies who have a connection to America doing business in Indonesia have to abide by this American law. And so being in America, studying American law will help you to understand that better, to be able to learn how to do the research, as was just talked about, to be able to understand what the law means and how it works, how it applies, and so forth. And you might decide to study a particular area of law. If you are interested in intellectual property, you could study IP law. If you're interested in tax law, you could study that. So you can study American law. The third reason to come to America and study for an LLM is to become a better lawyer. In my opinion, and I'm biased because I'm an American, but in my opinion, I think that American lawyers are the best lawyers in the world. And the reason they're the best lawyers in the world is, at least in part, because of American legal education. If you come to America to study for an LLM, and an LLM is a 1-year degree in America. In most countries, it's 2 or 3 years. In America, it basically can be done in 1 year. It's actually a little bit less than a year compared to what American students do. So you could come and you can learn in that year to be more like an American lawyer, to have better skills, to do analysis, to be able to argue. I'm sure that all of you have seen lawyers depicted on television and in the movies. Right? Those are almost always American lawyers. Now, it's because they're American movies, right? But that kind of skill to do a case is the kind of skill that an American lawyer has. All right, that's my introductory pitch. Let me turn to the PowerPoint slides. So I want to talk about applying to an LLM program and what the best practices are. In other words, things you should think about when you apply. First thing is to create a timeline. Most students in most countries, they take an exam, and by the exam, they're admitted into law school. And so there's not very much work that has to be done to apply. To apply to an American law school, by comparison, it's a great deal of work. So here are some things that you want to have time for. Time for to prepare and take the TOEFL, right? The English language ability. Law is an oral discipline and a verbal discipline. And you need a very high level of English in order to do well in an American law school. Second thing you need to do is have time to obtain your academic documents. You need to have an academic transcript. You need to be able to send that and arrange for it to go to the school to which you're applying. The third thing is you need to have a letter of recommendation. Now again, most students overseas from America don't have to do a letter of recommendation, but we want to know what your teachers think about your ability. And so we ask you to find someone to write a letter of recommendation. So it takes a little time to find that person, to talk to them, to have them write the letter and so forth. Fourth thing, in order to get a visa, you have to have financial documents. The American government wants to make sure you have enough resources to pay your expenses when you're in America and enough resources to come back when your program is over. So you need to secure those financial documents, and that can sometimes take a little time. If you don't have enough money on your own, you may need to work with friends or family to arrange for their financial support. Fifth thing is you need to have time to process your visa. So you need to get paperwork from the school. That's called an I-20. They send you a letter saying you're invited to come and be a student. Then you take that and go to the embassy and have an interview in order to have the visa issued. So all of that takes time to set up the interview, to get the letter, to go have the interview and so forth. And finally, you want to keep track of certain deadlines. So different schools have different kinds of deadlines. If you want to apply for a scholarship, you have to apply by this date. If you want to apply for admission to start in the fall of 2013, you have to apply by this day. So you need to keep track of all of those things, and depending on where you're going to apply and what your individual circumstances are, set the dates accordingly. So what I did with this slide is to do a sample timeline. This is a timeline assuming you would want to go to an LLM program in the fall of 2014. And this is just a sample. The actual dates would vary depending on what your circumstances were. I put from May to August, right? So that's next month through the summer, our summer. You would study for the TOEFL exam. You want to get the best score possible. It's a very important consideration in getting admission. So you want to spend some time to prepare for the TOEFL exam. You may prepare in your English classes in school and so forth as well, but you want to have time to get ready. Then in September, I put down gather documents. So you need your letter of recommendation, you need your transcripts, you go talk to people, school is in session by then, and so you can start to get those documents together. In October, I've got the personal statement and evaluation of your scores. Most law schools require you to write a personal statement. We want to have you tell us a little bit about yourself, your goals, your ambitions, your background, and that's something that most students aren't used to doing. And so it takes a little bit of time. Give yourself some time, set a goal, let's write it in October. When I say evaluate scores, you'll get your TOEFL scores back. If you took the TOEFL in September or August, you'll get your scores back, and if the score is not high enough, you can study for it and take it again. That gives you a little time to do that. November, December, you want to actually do the application. Now, I'm assuming that there would be a January 1st deadline, which is the case for some schools. And you would want to follow up on your documents. You've asked a teacher to write you a letter of recommendation. They might forget. So you want to go to them and remind them. You've asked the registrar to send your transcripts. You need to check and make sure that your transcripts get sent. In January, you may get your scholarship decision. You may get your admission decision. You know you're going to get into school. You make your decision. In March, you want to get your I-20 from the school, that document. Prepare your financial documents so that in May, you can go in and have your visa interview, get your visa, and then in July, travel to the US, right? So that's just a sample. The next thing I want to tell you about is the handling of the documents. This is a big issue that, again, most foreign students aren't aware of, but it's a very big issue in America. The reason it's a big issue is that first bullet point. There's a high level of concern about fraud. Now, I don't think that any of you would do something fraudulent, but there are students who want to be in America who will pay money to some nefarious people who will create false documents. And so because of that, we have to be very careful to make sure that the documents we're getting from you are true documents. So here are the safeguards against fraud. First of all, you need to have the document sent from and by the source. All right, so in particular, your TOEFL score needs to come from the educational administration that administers the exam. You can't just make a photocopy and send us your TOEFL score because that might have been doctored, right? With all of the technology, there are lots of ways to change things. So we don't want somebody to take their TOEFL score, kind of change it around and make it better. So we need to have it directly from the TOEFL people. The same is true of the academic records, right? There are students who falsified their academic transcripts. So your transcript should be sent by your school directly to the school that you're applying, not through you, because if it comes through you, there's a risk of fraud. The best practice is the same would be true with the letter of recommendation. The letter of recommendation should be sent by your teacher directly to the school so that we know that they're telling us what they really believe. And in some cases, these documents will need to be officially certified, right? So many schools, you can get an unofficial transcript or an official transcript. What's the difference? First of all, you have to pay, usually, for the official transcript. And secondly, there's some certification, a stamp, a seal. There's something on the document that shows that it's a true original document. So that's the handling of documents part. The next thing I want to talk about is the personal statement. I introduced that a moment ago, but I want to talk about how to write a really good personal statement, right? This is really important in America. It's something that can make the difference between a student gaining admission and being rejected. So you want to write a good personal statement. The goal is for us to have a better sense of you. If we read your application, we just get data. We just get information, your grades and so forth, but we don't know what your personality is like. We don't know what you're really dreaming for or thinking about. So those are the kinds of things that we want to know about. In many cases, the personal statement, that the application form will ask you a question. If they ask you a question, you should answer the question in your personal statement. A lot of times they just ask for a personal statement and it doesn't ask you a question, then you can write about what you want. So what should you write about? The next bullet point is that you should be personal and you should be honest. Again, I'm trying to understand what you are like. This is your opportunity to convey to me, and I read these applications, what you're really like and why I should be interested in you and why I should admit you to my law school, right? So mostly what you want to do is to tell a story, to talk about why you want to come to law school, why you want to come to America, why you want to come to my school as opposed to some other school. But it's also an opportunity to explain things in your file. For example, every once in a while, I'll get an application where a student has a year that they have really terrible grades, right? If they don't explain those grades, then I'm going to reject the student because I can't be sure that they'll work hard and that they'll do good work. But maybe they had a parent who was sick, and because their parent was sick and they lived in a village far away, they were traveling home to help take care of their parents every week. And because of that, they couldn't do their work. So that's the sort of thing that you could explain in a personal statement. I have these bad grades, I recognize they're bad grades, but here's the explanation, and then that will make a difference to me. The next point is you don't want to just restate your resume, right? Most applications want to see a resume. That will tell me where you went to school, what your grades were, what your work experience is, and so forth, which is all very useful information, but I don't need to see it twice, right? I can see it on the resume. Then when you write your personal statement, I want other information. I want to know about you. Final point here is you need to write it yourself and you need to write it well. Again, this is this idea of fraud and so forth. There are people who would hire someone to write their personal statement for them. Well, if somebody else writes your personal statement, it's not going to give me a very accurate version of you, right? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is it's not really honest to do that. One of the reasons that we ask for personal statements, one of the ways that we use the personal statement is to evaluate your English ability. So that's that last part. Write it well. Proofread it. Make sure that you have all the mistakes corrected, right? If it's really well written, that will help me think this person's going to do good work because of the quality of the writing. I think it's very appropriate to have someone else look at it, to have a friend or even a teacher review it and look for mistakes and point those out to you. But it should be your work. It should be your statement. Okay, this is the other best practices thing, and then I'm going to wrap up with some kind of mistakes not to make. So the letters of recommendation. Again, this is something that people aren't really used to overseas. The purpose of the letter of recommendation is to have a teacher convey to us your ability as a student beyond your grades, right? So if you're an A student, that's fabulous. And if the teacher says this is an A student, well, that doesn't tell me very much. I want to know what you're like in class. I want to know your level of engagement. I want to know how curious you are. If you do extra work after class, if you come by and talk to the professor, if you're involved in a community service project or community clinical opportunity where you're doing law work out in the community, those are the kinds of things that I want to know about and that the teacher can tell me about. Second point about the letter of recommendation, and I know that you don't write them, your teacher writes them, but when you go to them, you should ask for these things. The more specific the letter, the better. I want to know what makes this person a good student, and I want to know with examples and in detail. Is it because they work hard? Is it because they're a good writer? Is it because they're a good thinker? Because they make really good arguments? Whatever it is. Examples or experiences are very helpful in the letter. Personal knowledge is more important than the status of the writer. This is a very common problem around the world, and particularly in Asia. Everybody wants to have the highest person in the hierarchy write a letter for them, the president of the university or the dean. Usually that person doesn't know you at all, and so the letter of recommendation to me is worthless. I don't even read it. I don't care, because I want somebody who knows you and can comment on your ability as a student, that you do good work. So the knowledge that they have of you is more important than their status. And final point, this is like the point about the personal statement, the reviewer should write the letter. There are students who write the letter of recommendation for their professor, who then sends it to me, and I can tell that that's happened, and it's not useful. You know, the letters are just not helpful at all. So I don't give them any weight at all. All right, so I'm going to conclude with the top 5 mistakes that people make. And so my point here is for you to avoid these mistakes, okay? Do not do these things. Mistake number 1, an incomplete application. As I say, most students are used to taking an exam and getting in, and that's it. The application process is quite complicated in America. You need to be very careful that you get every part of the application done. I would say of the applications that come to me, maybe 70% of them are incomplete. That's a lot of incomplete applications. So make sure that your application is complete. If it's not complete, we don't review it, right? It's the same as if we don't get it at all. So you need to have a complete application. Second mistake, documents that are not properly certified. Right? They have a transcript in their file, they send it to me. That's not what I need. I need the transcript from the school that's an official certified transcript to come directly to me. Third mistake is errors or weak personal statement. Right? So it doesn't tell me anything, or it has grammatical or spelling errors in it. Right? If it looks bad and has poor English, that's very bad for you to get admission. Fourth mistake, and this is not that big a deal, but it does happen quite often, weak letters of recommendation. The teachers aren't really used to writing letters of recommendation either, because you're not used to asking for them, so you have to tell them what we're looking for. And so a letter of recommendation needs to tell me why you're a good student, give specific examples, specific skills that you have. Finally, the last mistake, missing the deadline. You miss the deadline, then you don't get access. Most of us have what I would call soft deadlines for the application itself. We'll be willing to consider an application that's late, but we do not have soft deadlines for the scholarship. And it's very expensive to study in America, and if you want some financial assistance, you have to get your application in by the time the deadline comes, or we will not consider you for the application, because there are other students who did submit it by the application deadline, and they get priority over you. I have like 2 minutes left, so I'm at the end. You can email me with questions, but I'll take 1 or 2 questions if there are any, and I know that there are law students in the audience. Anybody have a question about applying to law school that you'd like to ask? And these slides are all in the handout, so you should have the bullet points. Yes? You have to speak up so I can hear you. Oh, there's a mic.
Can I enter postgrad in America without undergrad in there?
Can
I enter postgrad in America without undergrad in there?
Without undergraduate in America? Yes. The LLM programs, most of them, for foreign students are designed for you to study law in your home country first and then come to America for an LLM degree. So you do not have to study undergraduate first. We expect that you study undergraduate and in some cases postgraduate in Indonesia and then come to America for the LLM. So you do not need to, you can come directly into the LLM. And it's usually from the LLB or the BA, the undergraduate degree. Did you have a question too? I have 56 seconds.
So is it only TOEFL course, or we also need a SAT course to apply a law school in the US?
So you're asking what courses you need to take?
No. You said that.
Oh, the LSAT. No, the LSAT is required to apply to the JD program. The JD program is a 3-year postgraduate program that's designed for Americans as their first law degree. The LLM is a 1-year program, and many schools have a program designed for foreign students. It does not require the LSAT. The only test that you would have to take is some kind of English test, the TOEFL exam, or some schools will also accept the IELTS. I have 8 seconds. Okay, one more question. It is like a game show.
I want to ask you about the letter of recommendation.
Okay.
How many do you need of the letter of recommendation? Is it enough from one person only, or?
Yeah, it depends on what the school asks for. And so when you decide which school you're going to apply to, or schools, you need to read their requirements very carefully and see what's required. At our school, it's only 1 letter of recommendation. And I think there are other schools that it's only 1, but there may be some that require more than 1. I don't know what everyone requires, but you need to look at the school, and it's a school-by-school requirement.
One more question.
Sure.
About what's your suggestion? Is it only the letter of recommendation made by our teachers, or the alumni of the university?
It's a very good question. Usually I get letters of recommendation that come from the teacher, but it doesn't have to be the teacher. And having watched some classes being taught, many of the times the class is just a lecture and the students are all just sitting out in the audience, and so there's no reason that the lecturer would know anything about the student other than they take notes and they take an exam, so they can't really comment. So if you've worked, if you have an employer, or if you work in a clinical setting, or you do some volunteer work, you know, somebody who can comment on your ability to be a successful lawyer and a successful law student. That's what we're looking for. And we will take a letter of recommendation from someone else. It doesn't have to be a teacher, but that's the most common model. But you can use someone else, absolutely. I'm out of time. I'll be at my table. I'll be happy to answer more questions later on. So thank you for your attention.
Next, we're going to ask Julie Foster to stand up and tell you how you can pay for your LLM degree.
All right. Now that you know what you need to do to apply, the next big question is always, how much is this going to cost, and how am I going to pay for it? It would be nice if it were free, but unfortunately it's not. There is a handout coming around that has an outline of what you're expected to pay for and what are some ways that you can find the money to pay for your LLM and study in the United States. Now, some things to take into consideration with the cost of study. The first big ticket item is going to be your tuition and fees. Tuition at United States universities tends to be quite high in comparison to other countries. So when you see that figure, you know, it may be a little surprising, but hopefully we can find some scholarships and other funding sources so it's not so bad. So tuition and fees is going to be your major expense. In addition to those fees, you may have additional fees for things such as health insurance or computer and technology fees. The next big item that you'll have to pay for is housing. Many universities offer on-campus housing, which is nice because you're close to your classes, you're close to your classmates. It can be a little bit more expensive, but those accommodations tend to be furnished and include your utilities, things such as gas and electric and water. So when you're looking at housing, look at on-campus options, but you also may want to live off-campus. As you're looking at where to apply, what kind of an environment you're living in is going to have a big impact on your expenses. Large cities, the cost of housing can be quite high, but they may have better public transportation. You'll be able to get around on buses and on trains and subways. Smaller towns, they may be cheaper to live in, but you may have to purchase a car, which will make things overall more expensive. So take those things into consideration as you're looking at where you would like to apply and where you would like to live in the United States. Along with housing, of course, you're going to have food and clothing, particularly if you're going to attend school in one of the colder climates. Indonesia, it's wonderful. You don't need a warm winter coat. You come to most places in America, you're going to need warm clothes and boots. Where I live, it actually snowed on Friday, so you have to be prepared to spend some money on those types of things. The last big ticket item that you'll have to pay for is travel. Travel from your home country to the United States, travel from where you stay to where you're going to school. You'll want to make sure to budget for all of those items. All schools on their websites will have what's called an estimated cost. So when you're trying to figure out how much will it cost me to attend this university, if you look on their websites, it will break down your tuition, fees, and estimated costs for housing, books and supplies, transportation, and food and clothing. So look for those items and make that as part of your decision-making process. As you look at where to apply, on many of the school's websites, you'll see information about scholarships they have available. As Dean Thomas talked about, often there are deadlines for those scholarships that may be earlier than the deadline for application. So as you're choosing which schools to apply to, make sure you know what the deadline is for scholarships. There also may be an additional application required for those scholarships and additional materials you'll need to gather. So find out that information early if you plan to apply for scholarships. So the first place you should look for money is from the institutions where you are planning to apply. The second place to look for is through both the Indonesian government and the U.S. government. We've all been brought here by Education USA and the embassy. They're very committed to Indonesian students studying in the United States. And the educational advisors can help you search for scholarships and funding that fit with your career plans and fit with your background. So I highly encourage you to speak with them early on about what options there are available. So if you look at the back of the handout, there are a lot of websites that give information on scholarships for graduate study in the United States. Many of these are very informative and have a lot of good information. The Education USA website, also the LLM guide, have a lot of connections with other databases and other funding sources. So I encourage you to investigate those. There is a word of caution, though, on searching on the internet for scholarships. If you're looking at a website and it says that they have money available for scholarships, but you have to apply for that information and they ask you to pay a fee. You should never be asked to pay a fee for a scholarship. If you're on a website and it says, we'll give you this information about this wonderful scholarship if you pay us a certain amount of money, it's a scam. They're taking your money and there is no scholarship. So make sure when you're on the websites and looking that they're not asking you for your credit card information or your bank information, or that they want money from you, because no scholarship with a good reputation is going to ask for an application fee from prospective students. So be very careful when you're giving out your information and when you're giving out particularly any financial information, that you're not giving that to someone who's trying to take your money and not give you any scholarship information. And if you think what you're looking at might be a scam, there is a list on the financialaid.org website that lists some of the more common scams. So if you think what you're looking at isn't legitimate, check that website and see if what you're looking at is on that list. But always be very cautious about who you're giving your information out to. There are also some major foundations that give out scholarships. Some of those are the World Bank Scholarship, Rotary and Golden Key, the Ford Foundation, Institute for International Education, and there's many, many more that if you do some searches on the internet, you can find other foundations, particularly ones that are specific to Indonesia, that have scholarship money available for your study in the United States. So I encourage you to do that investigation, talk with your Education USA advisors, and most importantly, begin that process early. If you're planning to study, let's say, for example, in the fall of 2014, you'll want to start looking for scholarship information over this summer. Most of the deadlines will be in October and November, and you want to be prepared to fill out those applications. So over a full year before you plan to start studying, start looking for the financing for that study. Also, if you have to provide additional information, you're going to need time to gather that information. You may need to supply transcripts, you may need to supply letters of recommendation, so make sure that you start that early. For those of you who plan to do your 2-year training after law school and then study in the United States, you may be able to find an employer who will sponsor you to study in the United States. Many law firms value the international experience and the training that you would receive. A lot of employers they'll pay for your education, but then you have to come back and work for them for a certain number of years to kind of pay them back for that. So look for employers and larger corporations that will help their employees get their education, and they'll help fund that. That's another excellent way. And last, I would encourage you to look at organizations that are in your field of study. If you have a particular interest in things like environmental law or tax law, lots of different areas of the law have large organizations that will support international students to come and study. So if you're interested in different specific areas of the law, do some research on those organizations and see if they offer any funding. Okay, I was going to leave lots of time for questions. Do you guys have questions about the money? Oh, we've got one back here. Oh, I think she's coming.
Thank you, Ms. Wasser, for all the explanation regarding the tuition for the LLM program. Though I want to ask you questions regarding the tuition aid that I have heard. However, I heard about tuition aid that only serve for American citizens. Are there any programs such as tuition aid for international students? That's the question I want to ask regarding the tuition aid. Thank you.
Most of the things that are specific for U.S. students are loans, are government-sponsored student loans, which have to be paid back. I know I'm still paying for my law school. But for international students, most of the funding that is available is through scholarships and fellowships, which wouldn't have to be paid back. But that funding is more limited than student loans that are available to U.S. citizens who, anyone who's accepted. There are some loan programs, private loans that you can get, but it is more difficult, and you typically need a U.S. cosigner to receive that funding. And it's not very common that international students take out loans. Most of the government money that's set aside for international students is through scholarships. So through Education USA, the Fulbright Foundation, those are the sources that you want to look at, because then that's money you don't have to pay back. Other questions on funding or on applying? Yes.
Hello. Thank you, Ms. Julia Poster. I want to ask you, how many university offers the full tuition fee waiver? I mean, how big is our chance to get the full tuition fee offer from the American university?
It really depends on the school. Some schools have funding that's set aside specifically for international students. I would encourage you to increase your chances by applying to more than just one school, applying to different schools in a variety of schools, just to increase your chances. And that's something you'll want to ask the universities you're interested in very early on. Some schools have those specific funds set aside, so you'll want to apply early, make sure that you have your credentials all in order, and talk to them very early. I can't speak for a lot of schools, but even if you have full tuition, you would still have to be able to fund living expenses. So you want to be aware of that as well. Okay, any other questions regarding funding or the admissions process? Yes.
Thank you, Miss. My name is Jenny. I study at Seranga University. When we are success to getting scholarship, how to manage a budget for study in the United States of America? How to manage a budget for study in America? How to manage?
How what?
How to manage?
How to manage?
A budget.
How to manage the budget? Yes. Okay. Budget questions. You want to talk early, and talk with your school early on about what your scholarship covers and what it does not, and plan out what your budget is going to be. So most schools have on their website, they'll say, here is how much you should plan for housing. Here is how much you should plan for food. And as you see how that is going to spread out over 9 months, that's the typical academic program for LLMs. Is it between 9 and 10 months? You want to come a little bit early and settle in, maybe stay a week or two after your program ends. So you want to plan on about 10 months of expenses. And it really is very dependent on where in the United States you're living as to how much of a budget you're going to need. I would encourage you to think very early on about, what you need for housing. If it's just you, it's easier to manage, paying for it if it's one person. If you're bringing a spouse and family, it becomes much more expensive. So once you've received a scholarship offer and you know how much aid you're going to get, look at that estimated cost of attendance and see what the difference is. And then divide it up over those different categories of what you're going to have to spend money on. Any other questions? Okay, I will be at my table if you have further questions you want to ask. If not, I think we can turn it over to our alumni panel.
Surya and Stephen, I'm going to change this a little bit. I'd like to ask each of you to speak, and then we'll let both of you take questions and answers at the same time. How about that? So, Stephen, why don't you go first, and then I'll ask Surya to follow, and then we'll take questions to both of you at the same time, okay?
Do you have the test? Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, how is everybody feeling now? Good, fine, excited about law school? You should. It's really fun. I am going to share you my experiences when I went to Berkeley. I went to Berkeley in 2010. I studied in Berkeley Law for a year. I took the LLM program, and I'm going to share with you one or two things about what to expect in a US law school classroom. Okay, so any of you here like to watch Suits? Hands up, please. Right. So, of course, you're interested about knowing what Harvey Specter went through before he went to work in a law firm, right? He had to go to law school. He had to experience the whole ordeal with the law school experience. So I'm going to try to share one or two things about that, basically. And if you have any questions, kalau ada pertanyaan, nanti bisa langsung tanyakan aja setelah presentasi saya. Okay, so first of all, pertama-tama, what is the most significant difference between a typical US law school classroom atmosphere and a classroom, for instance, in Atmajaya or University of Indonesia or Universitas Hukum apapun di Indonesia? The most different thing that I can share with you is that typically in US law school classrooms, the Socratic method is used. Apa sih Socratic method? What is it? Basically, in a Socratic method, first of all, it is used in most US law schools. Usually, a professor would all of a sudden, out of nowhere, call on you, ask you a question, and ask it randomly. So I can ask it to you, for instance. I might not know you, but I know that you're in my class, so I would ask you a question. Or I can ask anybody else. And this really actually tests how ready you are for the class. And I will also talk about this later on in my presentation. So this is what we call a cold call. Okay, the first thing after the professor asks you the question, the professor would expect the student to kind of paraphrase. Artinya, menjelaskan kasusnya itu dengan bahasa sendiri. So explain the case that you're studying in your own words. Ini juga salah satu cara untuk mencari tahu apakah si student ini sudah siap sebelum kelas. Because most of the time, you know, people get a cold call and then he or she is not prepared, and that would look pretty bad in front of the class. So this is a way of the professor to find out how ready the student is in a classroom. And then after asking about the case that is being studied in the classroom, setelah menanyakan kepada si student mengenai kasus yang sedang dipelajarin, the professor would act as some sort of a devil's advocate. Ini semacam istilahnya, ini bukan filmnya Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino yang zaman dulu itu. Basically, dia akan men-challenge. He will challenge your opinion on the case being studied. For instance, after you paraphrase, after you explain what you think about the judgment of the court, he will then ask whether or not you agree with the court judgment or the opinion of the judge. And he will try to kind of trigger arguments from you, from the students. Jadi ini semacam proses di mana si profesor itu akan mencoba men-challenge dan mengetes nih seberapa jauh si student ini percaya bahwa court judgment ini betul atau tidak. And then of course in the end, the professor would typically ask for the student to express what he thinks is right. I mean, whether he thinks the court judgment is true or not in rendering the opinion, for instance, dan juga salah satunya juga untuk mencari tahu seberapa jauh bukti-bukti yang dipelajari di kelas itu memang betul tercermin di dalam keputusan court tersebut. So that's a little bit about the Socratic method. Moving on. So, how to be prepared? So, a US law school classroom is quite tough, but you can always manage to be successful in a US law school classroom. And first things first, this is a very good wisdom word here. The one day you took a break from reading is the day you get called on in class. And this actually happened to me in my first ever cold call. Waktu itu saya lagi glazing, I was glazing basically, and the professor all of a sudden asked me, Mr. Baroka, what do you think about this case? And I was just struck by lightning. I was, okay, what should I say? And I wasn't prepared at that time. So I just told my professor, I'm sorry, professor, but I will have to pass at this time. So yeah, it felt really bad. And then, of course, after that, I knew better. So I will share you some tips and tricks on how to be prepared in a law school in the US. First of all, of course, before you make outlines, you have to read. Usually, professors would give a syllabus of the topics or subjects that will be studied in a semester. Jadi pada awal, hari pertama mulai belajar di law school, biasanya profesor akan kasih satu syllabus. Dia akan kasih tuh, misalnya tanggal on the 15th of April, you will have to read pages 15 to 45, atau pages 50 to 80, and so on and so forth. So you will always have some sort of guidance on what to read for the next class. Dengan adanya guidance itu, maka akan lebih mudah buat kita untuk make outlines. Outlines artinya adalah notes yang kita siapkan before we go to class. Be creative in making your outlines. I've had friends who made their outlines using different colors. For instance, you can mark the important things with red, and then maybe put some yellow, some green, however you like it. I mean, just be creative and make sure that you can read your own outlines. And maybe making your outlines more interesting would actually help you to be more interested in the subject as well. Use all available resources. The libraries are open from day to night. I was studying from, 10 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. And then a lot of the JD students, the LLM students did the same thing. Perpustakaan basically buka seharian penuh. And then they have a very good, collection of books, very clean. So the facilities are there and it's just there for us to use it. Jadi gunakan fasilitas atau resources yang ada. And not only the libraries, but also when I went to Berkeley, we were also given passwords for Westlaw or LexisNexis or some sort of online system where they have a database of cases from Supreme Courts, from state courts. Jadi bisa juga merefer secara online mengenai case-case yang dipelajari di kelas itu. So make sure to use all available resources. And lastly, try to keep it condensed. So don't make like 3 sets of outlines. Buat saja satu outlines, misalnya 5 pages atau 10 pages, yang bisa mudah dibuka kapan saja. So when you go to class, you bring your outlines, and when you get a cold call, you will have your outlines prepared in front of you, and you will be able to answer the professor's question. Next, I'm going to talk about IRAC and CRAC. So, what is IRAC and what is CRAC? Basically, these are ways of organizing your legal writing in a way that the reader can understand your writing in the best way possible. IRAC itu biasanya digunakan untuk exams, while CRAC itu more for memos. And I will explain that later. What does the I stand for? I itu issue. Usually when you are given question by the professor, or when you're working on a paper, when you're working on an exam, you want to structure your exam in a way so that you have the IRAC in that order. Issue. First of all, you have to state the issue. What is the problem? What is the issue? Apa masalahnya? And the typical thing to do is just to state, for instance, there's an issue as to whether you fill in the blanks. And then after stating the issue, you need to state the rule. So what is the legal principle for this case at hand? Jadi setelah kita menyatakan isunya apa, masalahnya apa, berikutnya kita lihat rule-nya apa nih, peraturannya apa, dasar hukumnya apa. So state the elements of rule of law and then also put some case law examples as well. After stating the rule, you try to apply the rule to the case at hand. Ini bisa juga selain application atau bisa juga analysis. Jadi setelah kita sudah state issue, kita sudah tahu rule-nya apa, sekarang dengan kita mengaplikasikan issue itu kepada rule yang kita sudah temukan, apa analisis kita? What is our analysis? State evidence, cite cases, and last but not least, you give your conclusion, kesimpulan. So after going through all the 3 steps before, you conclude by stating that, for instance, the court of the state of A was right in rendering its opinion about this case due to the fact that, or due to the evidence that, or due to, or considering the previous decisions by other courts, and so on and so forth. What's the difference between IRAC and CRAC? Biasanya kalau CRAC, you put the conclusion first. So you put the conclusion, rule, application, and then you can conclude again. Okay. Some tips and tricks while being in class. First of all, be active. Do not be scared to express your opinions. Okay, so I'm out of time, but I'll try to be quick. So be active, take notes always, ask and answer questions, and don't be afraid to express yourself. While in class also, refrain from unnecessary internet browsing. You will always have your laptops with you, but it doesn't mean that you can browse on Facebook or Twitter or some sort of social networking. Avoid talking about non-class subjects, and be aware and stay awake, because you never know when the professor is going to call you. So you always have to be aware. And after class, when you have time, and I think you should, you have to always revisit your notes. So during class, you make your notes, you take your notes, but after class, waktunya untuk merapihkan notes yang tadi kita buat di kelas. So it would be better for you to refine your notes after class. And then, of course, you have to read the materials for the next class, make outlines for the next class, and try to make time to meet your professor or your mentor. Usually, LLM students have JD mentors, so that will be also a good opportunity for LLM students to ask about questions about life in law school, about how to deal with the US law school classroom with the JD students, as well as with the professors themselves. Okay, I'm just going to be quick here. There are 2 types of exams. Basically, you have the in-class exams, and then you have the take-home exams. Ada 2 macam ujian, yang di kelas sama yang di luar kelas. For in-class exams, you have the open books and the closed book. Jadi bisa juga buka buku, bisa tutup buku. For the take-home exams, you have usually you will be given a time of 12 hours, 24 hours, 2 days. It varies, depends on the law school itself. And then one very important thing that you must always avoid when you go to a US law school is you can never plagiarize. Always make footnotes, always paraphrase. You can never, ever, ever copy someone else's work and acknowledge it as if it was your own work. That can really cause some serious problems for you. I've heard stories where LLM students get expelled because they copied other people's work without acknowledging that they are other people's work, and you don't want that to happen to you. Grading system. Basically, different schools apply different grading systems. You have when I went to Berkeley, we had the double honors, pass and fail. But I also know in other law schools, you have the A, B, C, D, so on and so forth. And then you also have the credit, the CR, or the no pass classes. And questions about living abroad, I will be outside in the Berkeley booth. So if you have any questions, or maybe later on in the Q&A session, you can ask me about housing, about transportation, about anything that you are interested in knowing about studying in a US law school. So that concludes my presentation. And now I give the floor to Pak Surya. Thank you very much.
Hello. Good afternoon. Selamat siang. Udah lapar ya? Belum. Well, I'm here today to talk about the same thing like Stephen did actually, and kind of like 80% was presented already. But I will talk about when first you come to the US, you get accepted in the university of your choice, and then first thing you come, and then you have to find your housing probably, and then you have to consider about the transport to go to your school, and then probably looking around your school, and then trying to find out where's the classroom. So the next day you won't be, or the earliest day, you won't be crazy looking for your classroom, and then looking for your professor, or looking for your schedule, something like that. It's basically the same like here. If you want to study in the law school, then you have to pick your elective, what you call it, the schedule, I guess, what you want to learn actually. And then some of them, it's required course that you have to take. Like before, couple hours ago, about the American legal system. I was taking that course like 26 years ago, sorry about that. And then when you start to explain about the American legal system, then I said, this will be end like in 4 months, you know, because it's very long. And then for us, for students from the civil law countries, then it's really a new thing, and then so many questions about that. And then talking about question, in the classroom, the professor really want to see that you are raising questions all the time. And then you will be graded based on your questions and your participation in class, which is rather different than here. Usually here, if you are participate aggressively, then you get lower grades. And over there, if you participate aggressively and probably you try to be fierce there, probably you get a better grade. And then before that, you have to know also the professor that teach your class. For elective course, then you can go and see the professor first, and then ask around, you know, ask with the other students, and then how he grades, what the professor expects from you. And then also look at the list of the readings, because you are expecting to read lots of pages, not like here. Over here, the books are thin, mostly like 100 pages, and you read like 50 pages a year, or 100 pages a year, something like that. And over there, they expect you to read like 50 pages, one course, one day. Something like that. It's very shocking. Because if you're not used to read, then it's going to be a problem. So read a lot and asking questions a lot. And then to see the professor before the class is before you entering that course is very important. Because believe it or not, some of the professors, they don't speak real English for us. Because he's speaking English and we don't understand. And some of them mumbling. And then if you already enrolled to that course or to that class, then you will have that experience for 4 months or 3 months. It will be very bad experience for you. And then when you ask question and the professor will ask or will answer your question with also mumbling English, you know. So this is not your fault actually. It's their fault. That's what I believe. Yeah. But actually, later on, after 6 months living in the state, then you found out that, well, now everybody's speaking English because you understand now, you know. But on the first semester, usually you have trouble in understanding the language and understanding the phrases. And then there's sometimes people using slang there. Then that's a problem for us, you know. So we are thinking that we are smart enough, and then suddenly over there we are not very smart, you know. And then talking about smart, to pass the passing grade over there, very easy. Let me tell you that it's very easy because passing grade like C is given to everybody. That attending the class and doing the homework and asking a little bit of questions. But with C's, you cannot find a work later on. You cannot find a good job after that. So you need at least A minus. It's going to be very hard. So if you expect to get an A minus, usually you need to reduce your sleeping time, less playing, no more games, no more discos, and then no more more communication, intense communication with your family. You know, usually you want to do that on midnight because the rates of the telephone is cheap, and then Indonesia is kind of daytime, while there you're midnight. And tomorrow morning at 8, you have to go to class. Then after like 1 hour or so, and then it's 1 a.m. in the morning, and then you haven't read anything, then it will be a problem. So don't worry too much, get passing grade, and then you don't get a good job, of course, after that, you know, but you spend more time with your family and then have more fun, actually. But if you want to have good grades, then less fun and less communication, or like Stephen said, unnecessary activities, including communication and playing, and maybe for the younger one, like boyfriend or girlfriend, you know, you can forget that until you can manage your time, actually. I guess if you have question, that's about it for me.
Thank you. Stephen, why don't we have both of you get up, and you can ask questions.
Please.
I have two questions. The first one is about the reading ability. That we all know Indonesian student is very different with American student. So what's your tips for that our reading ability? And the second one is, would it be possible if LLM students take the bar exam, like practice in America? That's all. Thank you.
About reading, I think the best way to deal with the difficulties in getting used to reading is get used to reading from now. For instance, try to get used to at least reading newspapers, every day, one newspaper. Or try to get used to reading books, not necessarily the young adult novels, but like more quality books. And then just get yourself used to reading. Like newspaper, just make it something that just happens every day. Just get used to it. I think that's my only tips for that. And for your second question about LLM students being able to take the bar exam, it is possible. Usually, basically, you have to pass the LLM class first before you can apply for a bar exam, but it is possible.
Well,
sorry.
As I said before, I'm from a law school in New York, and many of the students that come to my program in Buffalo and some of the New York schools as well get that question a lot. I want to take New York's bar exam. About 5,000 lawyers last year took a bar exam in the United States. 5,000 foreign lawyers took a bar exam in the United States, and about 4,000 of them took New York's bar exam. So New York is actually sort of the most taken bar exam in the United States. And interestingly, about a third of the people that year who took New York's bar exam were not from the United States. And that number's growing every year. So it's kind of a globally recognized credential. If you intend to sit for a bar exam, or even if you are remotely thinking about taking a bar exam, New York especially, I would put in the timeline that Dean Thomas had on the board that you send your documents to New York, because New York needs to evaluate your education ahead of time. And currently, and this wasn't the case when unless you went to law school last year, which I don't. 2 years ago. So it's even different since you went to school. In the last year, New York has started saying that because so many lawyers intend to take its bar exam, they now require you to send them your documents in October before the July bar exam. So they require a lot of time. So if you're thinking about that, talk to your LLM program representative and say, I think I might want to take a bar exam. Can you tell me more about that? Thank you.
So actually, I have some tips about quick reading. I opened a quick reading class. No, I'm just kidding. That's so maybe you can find somewhere, saying that that's a quick reading class, or course, very cheap, usually like $30, $40, something like that. Some people say it works. Some people say don't. In my case, don't work. You still have to read a lot, So start reading with the thing that you like, like young adults, I guess. Maybe for the boys, you're something like magazines, with pictures there, the pictures that you like, So it helps. It helps. And then later on, you move on to the more serious magazines like the Newsweek or Times or something like that, and then move on to the textbook. And textbook is really hard to read because it's dry, and then so many cases there, and then I think the writer don't know what they are talking about there, So after like 20 times you read, then you understand, So lots of reading. That's the only key. Thank you.
We have a question up here.
I have a question for both of you. As we have known that Indonesia has a different law system with U.S., why you chose to study in U.S. and why didn't you choose another country that have the same law system with Indonesia? Thank you.
Why I chose the U.S. law school is because I think that the American lawyers have this way of thinking, and that was explained before. They have this way of analyzing a case. They have a way of dealing with a case that is very specific and very well structured, and that you can get in a U.S. law school. And that's why I chose U.S. law school. There, you're always challenged in the class to structure your opinions in a very well manner, so that you will be very prepared when you actually go to work later on. So when you start working later after law school, you don't have to start really from nothing, but you have this really strong basis of organizing everything in a very well-managed structure. So I think that's the main reason why I chose U.S. law school.
Well, for my, you want to ask first or I answer first?
Why don't you answer first?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, in my case, I choose the U.S. Law school. It's because that in my time, it was like 26 years ago, it was so many American lawyers here. Some of the European lawyers, and then I thought it's cool to be able to be arguing like the American lawyers, because the European ones tend more passive, but they write very well. But the American one looks cool, you know, so that's why, you know. Thank you.
Okay, may I raise the questions, please? Thank you. My questions will be delivered to Pa Stephen Waroka. Actually, that you do your own presentation very well. Thank you. Well, Pa Waroka, I'm just wondering that it's sometimes it's a bit problems how to make a good outlines systematically. Could you please explain a little bit more your tricks on making an outline? Thank you.
Sure. You can even apply the IRAC's writing method in making your outlines. For instance, when you make your outline, you just state the issue, you state the rule, you make your analysis or the application of the rule to your case, and then you conclude. I think that's also a good way to make a good outline. So don't like make too long of an outline. Just state the issue. What's the issue? What's the rule? What's the analysis or the application? And then what's your conclusion? I think that's the best way of writing an outline, or in any case, actually, in writing a legal opinion as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Erma. I'm a one lecturer in University of Serang Raya, and I'm sure that many of our students here very interested to take their study in law, LLM. It means that it is my question for Mr. Surya. Would you please give me a suggestion to support my students to get a better or a quick adaptation about the class communication in LLM, as you had said before, that we have a different attitude. The students have different attitude in the class like that. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a kind of easy question, but it's a hard question as well, you know. My tips is that we have to be very talkative. So we have to exercise every day, be talkative, you know. So speaking to anybody, you know,